My ex-wife Brianna sent the same text message on the first of every month at exactly 9 in the morning, and seeing her name appear on my phone screen in my downtown Austin office always made my stomach drop with dread and rage. Need $3,500 by Friday. You know what happens if you're late. No greeting, no pleasantries, just the cold transactional demand followed by the implied threat that had controlled my life for the past 18 months since our divorce was finalized. I sat at my desk overlooking Congress Avenue, watching early morning traffic crawl through the Texas heat, and I felt the familiar wave of helpless fury wash over me as I stared at those 12 words that represented my monthly extortion payment. I was a commercial real estate broker making approximately $180,000 annually from commissions on office building sales and leases in the booming Austin market, and $3,500 monthly was bleeding me dry financially while funding Brianna's comfortable lifestyle in a luxury apartment in the Domain that I was essentially paying for through blackmail. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the powerlessness, the constant fear, and the humiliation of being controlled by someone I had once loved and trusted completely. The divorce had been brutal and expensive, costing me over $85,000 in legal fees and leaving me with almost nothing after Brianna's attorneys had torn apart our marital assets and secured her a settlement that gave her the house, half my retirement accounts, and $2,200 monthly in spousal support for 5 years. I had accepted all of it just to be free of the toxic marriage, believing that once the divorce was final, I could rebuild my finances and move on with my life without her constant drama and manipulation. But 3 months after the final papers were signed, Brianna had called me late one night around 11 with a proposition that made my blood run cold. I have the emails, Kevin. All of them from that situation with the Riverside property deal 2 years ago, where you and your partner Tim cut out the other investors to take the full commission yourselves. Fraud. Breach of fiduciary duty. Probably some criminal charges if the right people saw these communications. Her voice had been calm and almost cheerful as she described having evidence that could destroy my real estate license, my career, my reputation, and potentially my freedom if she chose to send those emails to the Texas Real Estate Commission or to the investors who had been cheated out of their rightful commissions. I had felt my entire world collapse as she explained what she wanted in exchange for keeping those emails confidential and not destroying everything I had built professionally over 15 years in commercial real estate. I need an additional $3,500 every month on top of the spousal support the court ordered. Think of it as a continuation of the lifestyle I deserve to maintain. Or think of it as insurance that your career doesn't implode and you don't end up disbarred and possibly prosecuted. See, Murray. She had paused, letting the threat sink in fully before continuing. I know you can afford it from your commissions, and I know you'll pay because you're too smart and too invested in your reputation to let this information become public. So here's how this works. First of every month, you transfer $3,500 to my account, and I keep being a good ex-wife who doesn't accidentally forward certain emails to people who would find them very interesting. The blackmail was explicit and undeniable, but I had no leverage to fight it because the emails were real and the fraud we had committed was exactly as illegal and career-ending as she described. Tim and I had conspired to hide a $240,000 commission from other partners on a major office building sale, splitting it between ourselves and fabricating documents to cover our theft of what should have been shared proceeds. That first payment 18 months ago had felt like swallowing poison as I logged into my banking app around midnight and transferred $3,500 to Brianna's account, watching my balance drop while knowing this was just the beginning of an indefinite extortion arrangement. I sat in my South Congress apartment that night, staring at the confirmation screen, wanting to smash my phone against the wall, but instead just feeling defeated and trapped by my own past mistakes that Brianna now weaponized against me monthly. The pattern had continued every month since then. Her text on the 1st at 9 in the morning, my transfer by Friday. No communication between us otherwise except for the transactional exchange of money for silence. I had tried once in month 4 to negotiate the amount down, suggesting $2,000 would be more sustainable long-term, and Brianna had laughed at me over the phone around 2 in the afternoon before saying, "You don't get to negotiate extortion, Kevin. You pay what I ask or I send the emails. Those are your only 2 options." I had transferred the full $3,500 that Friday and never tried to negotiate again, understanding that she held all the power in this arrangement and enjoyed wielding it over me monthly. The financial and psychological toll of the blackmail payments had been devastating in ways I couldn't fully articulate to anyone, since I couldn't explain why I was suddenly broke, despite making good income from real estate commissions. Between the court-ordered spousal support of $2,200 and the extortion payments of $3,500, I was sending Brianna $5,700 monthly while trying to rebuild my own life and finances after the expensive divorce. My rent in a modest apartment near South Congress was $100, my car payment and insurance another $800, and basic living expenses like food, utilities, and gas consumed most of what was left of my income after paying Brianna. I had no savings, no emergency fund, no retirement contributions beyond what my employer automatically withheld, and I was barely surviving month to month while watching Brianna post Instagram photos from her domain apartment with its pool and gym, showing off expensive dinners at Uchi, and weekends in San Antonio or Houston that my blackmail payments were funding. The rage and helplessness I felt seeing her live comfortably on money she was extorting from me through threats to destroy my career was almost unbearable, but I kept paying because the alternative seemed worse. Losing my real estate license, facing potential criminal charges, having my reputation destroyed in Austin's tight-knit commercial real estate community where word traveled fast and second chances were rare. The breaking point came on a Wednesday afternoon in late July when I was sitting in a Starbucks on West 6th Street trying to finish paperwork for a major lease deal that would generate a $42,000 commission if it closed successfully. My phone buzzed with a text from Brianna, even though it was the middle of the month and not her usual first of the month extortion schedule, and my hands started shaking before I even opened the message because unexpected contact from her always meant additional demands or threats. Need an extra $5,000 by Friday for some unexpected expenses. Don't make this difficult, Kevin. You know I can make your life very complicated very quickly. I stared at the message in the crowded coffee shop with anger rising in my chest so intense I thought I might actually scream or throw my phone across the room. This wasn't the agreed arrangement. She was supposed to get $3,500 monthly, and that was already destroying my finances, and now she was demanding an additional $5,000 with 2 days' notice, like I was some ATM she could withdraw from whenever she felt like buying something expensive she couldn't afford on the $5,700 monthly I was already giving her. I called her immediately, not caring that I was in a public place or that my voice was shaking with barely controlled rage as other customers glanced over at me with concern. What the hell is this, Brianna? We had an arrangement. $3,500 monthly, not random additional demands whenever you feel like it. I can't just produce $5,000 in 2 days. I don't have that kind of cash sitting around after paying you and my own bills every month. She laughed on the other end of the line, that cold, dismissive sound that I had come to hate more than any other noise in the world. Oh, Kevin, you're so dramatic. I need the money for some work on my apartment and a trip to Miami I'm taking next week. You can pull it from your commission on that lease deal you're working on. I know it's about to close because I still have friends who work at your firm who tell me about your deals. The casual admission that she was monitoring my business through informants made my skin crawl, realizing she knew more about my professional life than I had imagined and was tracking my income to calibrate her extortion demands accordingly. I'm not giving you an extra $5,000, I said, my voice louder than I intended, drawing more stares from people around me in the coffee shop. The lease hasn't closed yet. I don't have the commission, and even when it does close, I need the money to catch up on bills you've put me behind on with your blackmail. The answer is no. The silence on the other end lasted about 5 seconds before Brianna's voice came back cold and sharp as a knife, cutting through my defiance. Wrong answer, Kevin. You have until Friday at 5 in the evening to transfer $5,000 to my account, or I'm forwarding those emails to the Real Estate Commission and to Mark Henderson personally. Mark Henderson was one of the investors Tim and I had defrauded on the Riverside deal, a prominent Austin developer with connections throughout the city who would absolutely destroy my career and possibly pursue criminal charges if he learned we had stolen his share of a $240,000 commission. You want to call my bluff? Go ahead. See what happens to your precious career and your little lease deal when everyone in Austin commercial real estate knows you're a fraud and a thief. She hung up before I could respond. And I sat there in the Starbucks at 3 in the afternoon, trembling with rage and fear, and feeling more trapped than I had at any point in the 18 months of extortion. I left the coffee shop and walked aimlessly through downtown Austin in the oppressive July heat, sweat soaking through my dress shirt as I tried to figure out what to do about Brianna's escalating demands. The realization hit me hard as I walked past the Texas State Capitol building. This would never end. Even if I paid the $5,000 this time, there would be another demand next month or the month after, always increasing, always leveraging the same threat to extract more money until I had nothing left or until she finally decided to destroy me anyway, just because she could. I had been operating under the naive belief that if I just kept paying the $3,500 monthly, she would be satisfied and leave me alone. But her demand for additional money proved she saw me as an unlimited resource to be drained indefinitely. I stopped walking and stood on the corner of Congress and 11th Street watching traffic pass, and I made a decision that terrified me, but also felt like the only way to stop living in constant fear and financial ruin. I wasn't going to pay the $5,000, and I wasn't going to pay the monthly $3,500 anymore either. I was done being blackmailed, even if saying no meant she would follow through on her threats and destroy everything I had built. That evening around 7, I called a criminal defense attorney named Sarah Mitchell, who specialized in white-collar crimes and had a reputation for being aggressive and creative in protecting clients facing serious legal exposure. I sat in her office in a high-rise on Congress Avenue and told her everything: the Riverside property fraud, the emails Brianna had, the 18 months of blackmail payments, and her latest demand for $5,000 with threats to expose me if I refused. Sarah listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, and when I finished, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You've committed several crimes here, Mr. Reynolds. The fraud itself, the conspiracy with your partner, probably tax evasion if you didn't report the full commission you actually received. If your ex-wife sends those emails to the right people, you're looking at potential criminal charges, definite loss of your real estate license, civil lawsuits from the investors you defrauded, and professional reputation damage that would make it impossible to work in commercial real estate in Austin ever again." She paused to let that sink in before continuing. "But your ex-wife has also committed a serious crime. Extortion under Texas Penal Code is a felony punishable by up to 10 years in prison. The question is whether we can use that to protect you, or whether exposing her crime just accelerates your own legal problems." "The union," Sarah explained the strategy she was proposing with a calm directness that made me feel like maybe I wasn't completely powerless in this nightmare situation Brianna had trapped me in for 18 months. "Here's what we're going to do. You're going to record your next conversation with Brianna where she explicitly demands money and threatens to expose you if you don't pay. Texas is a one-party consent state, which means you can legally record conversations you're part of without the other person's knowledge or permission. Once we have clear audio of her committing extortion, we approach the Travis County District Attorney with a deal. You cooperate fully about the Riverside fraud, provide evidence and testimony, accept appropriate consequences for your role, and in exchange we present evidence of Brianna's extortion and request that she be prosecuted as well." She tapped her pen on the legal pad for emphasis. "The DA will be interested in the extortion case because it's clear-cut felony behavior with documentary evidence of payments over 18 months. Your fraud case is more complicated and happened 2 years ago with no current victims actively complaining. We leverage that difference to negotiate the best outcome we can, possibly probation or restitution instead of jail time for you, and serious criminal charges for her that end the blackmail permanently and give you back control of your life." The plan made strategic sense, but it also meant voluntarily confessing to crimes I had been desperately hiding for 2 years and accepting whatever legal consequences came from that confession. I sat in Sarah's office overlooking the Austin skyline at 8 in the evening, watching lights come on in buildings across downtown, and I wrestled with whether I had the courage to blow up my own life in order to stop Brianna from controlling it. What if the DA doesn't offer a good deal? What if I confess everything and still end up in jail or completely ruined professionally while Brianna gets some minor punishment that doesn't really stop her? Sarah nodded, acknowledging the legitimate fear behind my questions. "That's a risk, yes, but consider your alternative. Keep paying Brianna indefinitely while she increases her demands until you're bankrupt, and live in constant fear that she'll expose you anyway whenever it suits her purposes or whenever you can't meet her escalating demands. At least this way you're taking action instead of being a victim, and you're creating leverage by having evidence of her crimes that partially offsets your own legal exposure. She was right, and I knew it even though accepting it meant facing consequences I had been running from for 2 years. I left Sarah's office around 9 that night and called Brianna from my car in the parking garage, my hands shaking as I activated the recording app on my phone that Sarah had helped me set up before I left. Brianna answered on the 3rd ring, her voice irritated and impatient. "What do you want, Kevin? If you're calling to beg for more time on the $5,000, the deadline is still Friday at 5 in the evening, and I'm not extending it." I took a deep breath and launched into the script Sarah had helped me prepare to get Brianna talking explicitly about the extortion. "I need to understand something before I make this payment. You're demanding $5,000 on top of the $3,500 monthly you're already getting from me, and you're threatening to send those emails about the Riverside deal if I don't pay. Is that correct?" Brianna sighed with exasperation. "Yes, Kevin, that's exactly correct. I have emails proving you and Tim defrauded investors out of $240,000 in commissions. If you don't pay me what I'm asking, I send those emails to the Real Estate Commission, to Mark Henderson, to everyone who needs to see them to destroy your career and possibly get you arrested. Is this really that complicated for you to understand?" I pushed harder, needing her to be even more explicit about the exchange of money for silence that constituted extortion under Texas law. "So to be completely clear, you're saying that if I pay you $5,000 by Friday, you'll keep the emails confidential and not send them to anyone. But if I don't pay, you'll send them specifically to hurt me professionally and legally. That's the deal?" Brianna's laugh came through the phone, sharp and mocking. "Jesus Christ, Kevin. Yes, that's the deal. That's been the deal for 18 months now. You pay me to keep quiet about your fraud, and I don't destroy your life. It's pretty straightforward extortion, and we both know you're going to pay because you're too much of a coward to face the consequences of what you did. Now stop wasting my time with these obvious questions and just transfer the money by Friday like a good little ATM." The contempt in her voice was clear, and I felt rage building again, but I forced myself to stay calm and get one more confirmation. "And this will keep happening? You'll keep demanding money whenever you want it, using those emails as leverage to make me pay?" Her response was immediate and cold. "For as long as I want, yes. You created this situation by being a criminal, Kevin. I'm just capitalizing on your stupidity. Now hang up and figure out how you're getting me that $5,000. I ended the call and sat in my car in the dark parking garage, replaying the recording and feeling a mixture of triumph and terror. She had said everything we needed. Explicit demands for money, explicit threats to expose my crimes if I didn't pay, explicit acknowledgement that this was ongoing extortion that would continue indefinitely. I had the evidence Sarah needed to approach the DA with Brianna's felony clearly documented in her own words on a legal recording. But I also had just set in motion a chain of events that would expose my own crimes and potentially destroy the career and life I had been desperately protecting through 18 months of blackmail payments. I drove back to my South Congress apartment around 10 at night and didn't sleep at all, alternating between reviewing the recording and imagining all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong, even with Sarah's strategic plan. Friday came and I didn't transfer the $5,000 to Brianna's account. The first time in 18 months, I had defied one of her payment demands. My phone exploded with increasingly angry texts starting at noon. "Where's my money?" At 12:15. "You have 3 hours, Kevin. Don't test me." At 2 in the afternoon. "Last chance. Transfer now or I'm sending the emails." At 4:30. At 5:15 in the evening, my phone rang with Brianna's call and I let it go to voicemail. Listening minutes later to her furious message. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Those emails are going out tonight to everyone who matters. Enjoy watching your career burn down, you stupid bastard." Her voice shook with rage, and I knew she meant it. The blackmail arrangement was over, and now we were both going to face consequences for our crimes. I met with Sarah Mitchell at 8 in the morning the next day, a Saturday, in an emergency meeting she had agreed to after I called her late Friday night in a panic about Brianna's threat to send the emails. Sarah listened to the voicemail and reviewed the recorded conversation from earlier in the week, then made a call to a contact she had in the Travis County District Attorney's Office who agreed to meet with us that same day, given the time-sensitive nature of the situation. By 11 in the morning, I was sitting in a conference room at the DA's office with Sarah beside me, facing Assistant District Attorney Michael Chen, who specialized in fraud and extortion cases. Sarah played him the recorded conversation and showed him bank records documenting 18 months of $3,500 payments to Brianna, explaining the extortion arrangement and Brianna's threat to expose my crimes if I stopped paying. My client is prepared to provide full cooperation regarding the underlying fraud case involving the Riverside Property Commission. He understands he committed crimes and is willing to accept appropriate consequences. But we're here because his ex-wife has been committing felony extortion for a year and a half, and she threatened last night to weaponize information about his crimes because he refused to pay her latest demand. Michael Chen reviewed the evidence carefully, listening to the recording twice and examining the bank statements showing the pattern of monthly payments that correlated exactly with Brianna's extortion timeline. This is clear-cut extortion with excellent documentation. The recording alone would be sufficient for charges, and the payment history establishes pattern and duration that makes this a serious felony with significant prison time if convicted. He looked at me directly, his expression neutral but not hostile. Tell me about the Riverside fraud. What exactly did you and your partner do? Who was harmed? And what evidence exists beyond what your ex-wife has? I spent the next 40 minutes explaining the entire scheme, how Tim and I had conspired to hide the full commission from a $12 million office building sale, how we had fabricated documents showing a lower commission than we actually received, how we had split $240,000 that should have been shared with other partners, including investor Mark Henderson, who had brought the deal to our firm. Michael took detailed notes and asked pointed questions about dates, amounts, documentation, and who else knew about the fraud. When I finished, he sat back and considered the situation carefully before outlining what he was willing to offer. Here's the deal I'm prepared to make. You plead guilty to 1 count of fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. You cooperate fully with our investigation, including providing all documentation and testimony we need. And you make full restitution to the victims of $120,000, which is your half of the stolen commission. In exchange, I recommend probation instead of jail time, community service, and we don't pursue additional charges like tax evasion or other potential crimes related to this scheme. He paused to let me absorb that before continuing. Your real estate license will almost certainly be suspended or revoked by the licensing board once this becomes public, and you'll face civil lawsuits from the victims. But you won't go to prison if you comply with all terms of the plea agreement. Simultaneously, we'll immediately begin criminal investigation of your ex-wife for extortion based on the evidence you've provided. We'll subpoena her bank records, interview her, and if the evidence supports charges as strongly as it appears to, she'll be arrested and prosecuted for felony extortion, which carries 2 to 10 years in prison. Michael looked at me steadily. You both committed serious crimes. The difference is, you're here cooperating and accepting responsibility, while she's actively continuing her criminal behavior and threatening to weaponize the legal system to protect her extortion scheme. That matters in how this plays out. I signed paperwork that afternoon, formalizing my cooperation agreement with the DA's office, and by Monday morning, detectives were executing a search warrant on Brianna's apartment in the Domain, while simultaneously serving her with a subpoena to appear for questioning. I wasn't present for any of that, but Sarah kept me updated throughout the day on how the investigation was unfolding. Brianna had apparently been shocked and furious when police showed up at her door at 7 in the morning with a warrant to search for evidence of extortion, and she had immediately called a criminal defense attorney who advised her not to speak to investigators. But her bank records told the story clearly. 18 months of $3,500 deposits from my account on a consistent monthly schedule, plus the spousal support payments that were court-ordered, showing the clear pattern of additional payments beyond what any legal obligation required. Text messages and emails recovered from her phone and laptop showed dozens of instances where she had demanded money and threatened to expose me if I didn't pay. creating an overwhelming documentary record of sustained felony extortion. Brianna was arrested on Thursday afternoon and charged with 1 count of extortion, a second-degree felony in Texas, carrying a potential sentence of 2 to 20 years in prison. I learned about her arrest from a text message Sarah forwarded me, showing the booking information from Travis County Jail, and I felt a complex mixture of relief, vindication, and residual fear about whether she would somehow still manage to destroy me, even while facing her own criminal charges. Her bail was set at $50,000, and she posted it within hours, presumably using money she had saved from the extortion payments I had made over 18 months. The irony that my own blackmail money was funding her legal defense and bail wasn't lost on me, and it added another layer of anger to the already complicated emotions I was processing about this entire situation. My own legal reckoning was approaching rapidly. News of my fraud case and cooperation with prosecutors would become public once formal charges were filed, and I would face the professional and personal consequences I had been avoiding for 2 years by paying Brianna's extortion demands. The terror of that exposure was real, but it was also liberating in a strange way to finally stop running from consequences and stop being controlled by someone who had weaponized my mistakes against me for a year and a half. The fallout from both criminal cases unfolded over the next 6 months in ways that were painful, but ultimately less catastrophic than I had feared during those 18 months of living under Brianna's blackmail. My fraud case became public when I formally pleaded guilty in district court to 1 count of fraud and 1 count of conspiracy, and local business media covered the story with headlines about commercial real estate broker admitting to commission theft from investors. My real estate license was immediately suspended by the Texas Real Estate Commission pending a formal hearing, and Mark Henderson filed a civil lawsuit against me and Tim, seeking triple damages plus legal fees for the fraud we had committed. I had to liquidate what little savings I had managed to keep and take out a personal loan to begin making the $120,000 restitution payments the plea agreement required, and I knew the civil lawsuit would likely drain whatever financial resources I had left over the coming years. But I wasn't going to prison. I wasn't facing additional criminal charges. And most importantly, I was free from Brianna's control for the first time in 18 months. Brianna's extortion trial began 8 months after her arrest, and I was called to testify about the 18 months of blackmail payments and the threats she had made to expose my fraud if I stopped paying. Sitting in the Travis County courtroom at 9:30 in the morning with Brianna staring at me from the defense table with pure hatred in her eyes was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my life. But I testified truthfully about every demand, every threat, every payment I had made under duress. The recorded conversation where she explicitly described the extortion arrangement was played for the jury, and I watched their faces as they heard Brianna coldly explaining how she would destroy my career if I didn't keep paying her monthly demands. Her defense attorney tried to argue that I had paid her voluntarily and that her threats were just empty talk between bitter ex-spouses. But the documentary evidence of systematic payments over 18 months combined with her own recorded words made that argument impossible to sustain. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on the extortion charge, and Brianna's face crumbled as the verdict was read at 2 in the afternoon. The judge sentenced Brianna to 6 years in prison with possibility of parole after 3, a substantial sentence that reflected the sustained and calculated nature of her extortion over 18 months. I sat in the back of the courtroom and watched her be led away in handcuffs, and I felt no joy or satisfaction, just exhaustion and relief that this nightmare was finally, definitively over. She couldn't threaten me anymore, couldn't demand money anymore, couldn't control my life through fear of exposure because I had already been exposed and had accepted consequences for my own crimes. The spousal support obligation had been terminated by the court once her criminal conviction became final, so I was no longer legally obligated to pay her anything, and the extortion payments had obviously stopped the moment I refused her $5,000 demand months earlier. For the first time in over 2 years, I was financially independent, keeping my own income for my own expenses without sending thousands of dollars monthly to someone who was using my mistakes as leverage to fund her lifestyle through blackmail. Rebuilding my career and life after both the fraud conviction and the public exposure of Brianna's extortion was harder than I had anticipated, but not impossible with sustained effort and humility. My real estate license was formally revoked after a hearing where I took full responsibility for the fraud and didn't contest the revocation, effectively ending my career in commercial real estate in Texas. I found work as a property manager for a small apartment complex in South Austin, making $52,000 annually. A massive pay cut from my previous commissions, but steady income that allowed me to make restitution payments and cover basic living expenses. The work was humbling, dealing with tenant complaints, coordinating maintenance, managing budgets, but it was honest work that didn't involve fraud or cutting ethical corners to maximize commissions. I attended court-ordered community service on weekends, met with my probation officer monthly, and slowly paid down the restitution I owed to Mark Henderson and the other investors Tim and I had defrauded. The financial recovery was slow and painful, but it was also mine, built on my own legitimate work rather than maintained through crime or defended through paying blackmail. It was during this rebuilding period, about a year after Brianna's conviction, that I read a book recommended by my therapist, who I had started seeing to process the trauma of the extortion and the consequences of my own criminal choices. The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene was a book about strategy, manipulation, and power dynamics that initially seemed cynical and immoral, but contained insights that helped me understand both what Brianna had done to me and what I had allowed by being controlled by fear. One law in particular resonated with my experience. Law 15. Crush your enemy totally. If you leave even one ember burning, however dimly, a fire will eventually break out. Vidoriman, I had tried to manage Brianna's blackmail by paying her demands while hoping she would be satisfied and leave me alone, leaving the ember of her leverage burning rather than extinguishing it completely. That half measure had allowed her to escalate demands and maintain control indefinitely until I finally took the hard action of exposing both our crimes and accepting consequences that removed her power entirely. The book taught me that some situations can't be managed or negotiated. They have to be ended completely, even at significant cost, and the cost of ending them is almost always less than the cost of letting them continue indefinitely while slowly destroying you. Looking back on the entire arc from that first extortion call at 11 at night 2 years ago to sitting in my modest South Austin apartment now as a property manager, rebuilding my life from the wreckage of my own mistakes and Brianna's exploitation, I could see how fear had paralyzed me into accepting an unsustainable situation for far too long. I had been so afraid of losing my career and facing legal consequences that I had chosen 18 months of financial and psychological torture through blackmail, not understanding that the consequences I feared were inevitable whether I paid Brianna or refused her demands. The only difference was that by finally saying no and accepting those consequences on my own terms through cooperation with prosecutors, I had also ensured Brianna faced her own consequences and lost the power to control my life through threats. She was in prison serving 6 years for extortion, while I was free, working honestly and slowly rebuilding, despite the damage both of us had caused through our respective crimes. The gold-digging ex-wife who had blackmailed me for money every month was gone. Not because I had paid her enough to satisfy her greed, but because I had finally found the courage to stop paying and accept the hard consequences that came with ending her leverage. That decision had cost me my career, my savings, and years of legal and financial struggle, but it had also given me back my autonomy and self-respect, proving that sometimes the only way to stop being a victim is to stop acting like one, even when the price of resistance seems impossibly high.